The anime begins with the introduction of Michio Kaga, a daring adventurer, who gets transported to a virtual reality game world called Isekai. Michio had been trying out the game, answering some peculiar questions to enter the game system, while the game administrator briefed him on the game's point system. He had no idea that he had been transported to another world until he was given the power to identify status and given several items such as a sword named Durandal and a ring that boosted his strength. Initially, Michio was oblivious to the fact that he had been whisked away to another world. It wasn't until he was about to embark on his adventure in the game, and saw a gang of bandits attacking a village that he realized his predicament. He was intrigued by the bandits' leader who had a high label and was wearing a bandana item. As a novice adventurer, Michio saw this as an opportunity to seize the item and brutally fought off the bandits until they were defeated. His power level increased after the fight, and he struggled to log out of the game, finally realizing that he was trapped in another world. At that time, Michio was thrown into a state of panic when he realized that he had killed human beings, but he had no choice but to come to terms with his fate and live in the new world he found himself in. Following his victory over the bandits, Michio was able to acquire loot and an intelligence card which served as a symbol of social status for human beings. He planned to sell these items in Vale City to obtain money and planned to stay there for a while. Upon reaching the adventurer's office, Michio promptly exchanged his items and proceeded to the slave trade market to purchase a slave using his intelligence card. At the market, a slave trader named Alan offered Michio a slave with whom he could sleep. However, he was captivated by a female slave named Roxane, who was from the Wolfkin race and belonged to the Beast Warrior class, which could help him in battle. It turned out that Roxane had significant assets, which drew Michio's attention, but he lacked the funds to purchase her. As a result, Alan provided Michio with a 5-day deadline to obtain the required funds. He suggested that Michio explore a labyrinth and battle monsters to earn a large sum of money. However, if Michio was not inclined to go down that path, he could hunt down bandits instead. Nevertheless, as hunting bandits involved a high level of risk, Michio ultimately decided to explore the labyrinth instead. After making all the necessary preparations, Michio bravely entered the Vale Labyrinth located on the first floor. Michio is a skilled individual with various professions, and his job status can change depending on the activities he engages in. For instance, if he steals someone's sandals, he becomes a thief, but if he defeats bandits or criminals, he becomes a hero. However, Michio's primary occupation is an adventurer, which grants him the ability to move around swiftly using teleportation portals. Nevertheless, this portal has its limitations as it only works in areas that Michio is familiar with, and it fails during battles. While exploring the labyrinth, Michio encountered a level 1 wooden monster that attacked him suddenly. Fortunately, his Durandal sword proved useful, and he defeated the monster with ease. However, because Michio relied heavily on his mastery points or MP, he became lazy and thought negatively. This could have been avoided if he had used the Durandal sword's ability to absorb enemy points, but unfortunately, the sword's level was too low, and the effect was minimal. Long story short, Michio eventually hunted down other wood monsters and collected many valuable items. After finishing his exploration of the labyrinth, he sold the items he had gathered. However, the proceeds were not enough, and he was running out of time, so he decided to take on bandits, knowing it would cost him his life. He did this intentionally to obtain Roxane. The following day, Michio remembered the words of someone who had spoken to him previously about a slum area in the city that was frequently targeted by bandits. Curious, he decided to check it out and found the area vastly different from the lively city he knew. Unfortunately, Michio's search for success was met with disappointment during the day. Determined not to give up, he continued his search into the night. As he was wandering around, he stumbled upon a bandit who had just left a brothel. Michio decided to follow him secretly to see where he was going. This led him to the bandits' hideout where he discovered the group's lair. Before taking on the bandits, Michio recalled some intelligence he had gathered about the various bandit groups and their targets. He used this information to carefully observe and monitor the bandits, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. He even went as far as to plan to keep some of the bandits alive so he could sell them as slaves. While gathering more information, Michio spoke with the innkeeper who revealed that the bandits' behavior had worsened since their leader, Hugo, was killed. In a shocking realization, Michio came to understand that he was the one who had killed Hugo on his first day in this new world. Then, with only 1 day remaining to redeem Roxane, Michio quickly enacted his plan to eliminate the bandits. Using his trusty Durandal sword, he silently killed 3 bandits. However, due to unfavorable circumstances, he was eventually forced to flee to the labyrinth by using his teleportation skill. On the final day of Roxane's redemption, Michio traded several intelligent cars to the knights in the city center. They rewarded him with a generous sum of coins, which he immediately used to redeem Roxane from Ellen. Finally, she was officially his. Soon after, Michio took Roxane to his inn and got a larger room with a single bed. At that time, Roxane was frightened that Michio might do something to her, but he reassured her that he only wanted her company to explore the labyrinth. They then went to purchase equipment for their journey, including shields, weapons, robes, and even some necessities for Roxane. When they returned to the inn, Michio tried to approach Roxane, but they were both still nervous. To distract herself, she asked Michio if she could clean his sword using her underwear. As the sun set and darkness engulfed the land, Michio's yearning to sleep with Roxane became irresistible. In no time, the innkeeper came in with 2 pails filled with steaming water for them to freshen up. Afterward, they washed each other's bodies, and then Michio mustered the courage to confess his forbidden desires to Roxane. He asked her to kiss him before he fell asleep and right after he woke up. Their lustful desires reached a tipping point that night, and they surrendered themselves to each other. When the morning sunrays flooded their room, Michio's thoughts drifted towards his combat skills. He inquired from Roxane about ways to improve his abilities. But much to his dismay, she informed him that only the expert blacksmiths of the dwarves could assist him with that. However, she warned him to be cautious as some dwarven blacksmiths might exploit their customers. With this in mind, Michio considered recruiting a skilled blacksmith to join their team so that they could upgrade their weapons frequently. And with his teleportation abilities, they geared up and set out to enter the labyrinth. During that time, Michio's teleportation skills had deeply impressed Roxane, but he insisted that she kept it hush-hush from others. Meanwhile, Roxane utilized her sharp sense of smell to locate their adversaries. She also asked Michio to gather magic crystals from the monsters they were planning to hunt. Unfortunately, Michio was unaware of what magic crystals were, and thus didn't have any with him. To clear his confusion, Roxane explained that magic crystals were tools used to trap and store the magical energy of the monsters they defeated. The crystals would enable them to access and control the monsters' powers. They needed to collect the magic crystals to store the strength of the monsters they killed, which could be sold later at an exorbitant price. Soon after Roxane explained everything about the magic crystals, she and Michio began hunting needlewood monsters on the first floor. They caught a lot that day, so Michio decided to buy magic crystals to preserve their power. When they defeat monsters in multiples of 10, the color of the magic crystal changes. Upon returning to the labyrinth, they discovered that Michio's magic crystal had turned purple, indicating that they had gained substantial additional strength. There, Michio noticed that Roxane didn't have any healing magic powers in her status window. He learned that only priests or monks possessed those abilities. Therefore, they planned to gain the status of a priest. Fortunately, with their tactics, they were able to attain the status of monks and use healing skills to treat their wounds. After a long and tiring adventure, Roxane and Michio decided to return to the inn to take a break. Michio helped Roxane wash her body, and they rested for the night. The following day, they headed back to the labyrinth, hoping to progress to the second floor by defeating the boss monster on the first floor. They finally stumbled upon the boss monster and engaged in a fierce battle. Despite the monster's strength, Roxane and Michio fought bravely and emerged victorious in a short period. To their surprise, a leaf item appeared, and they quickly grabbed it, gaining the skill of an herbalist. Michio used the newly acquired skill to create an antidote pill. Knowing that the second floor would be even more dangerous, Roxane and Michio went back to town to purchase additional antidotes before embarking on their journey. As soon as they arrived, they encountered 2 ferocious monsters, the green caterpillar and the needlewood, and engaged in a challenging battle. However, with their courage and fighting skills, they managed to defeat the monsters and received a valuable caterpillar thread item as a reward. Roxane then informed Michio that the monsters would become tougher as they ascended to higher floors. Feeling exhausted from their battles, Roxane and Michio decided to rest at an inn. However, on their way back, he suddenly pushed her against the wall, indicating that someone was watching Alan's slave shop. It turned out to be a bandit, but Michio couldn't determine why the bandit was there or what his intentions were. Soon after, when they had received the news, they promptly informed Alan, who was already aware of the situation. As Alan observed, the bandit Michio had sold his property to a mysterious figure, who had subsequently liberated the slaves. This led him to suspect that the bandit was planning to lure other bandits to attack his own territory. At first, Michio was hesitant to get involved, but when he saw how worried Roxane was for the people who had shown him kindness, he decided to offer his services as Alan's bodyguard, which was accepted. Following this, they made their way to Alan's backyard to use the teleportation device. Upon their return, Michio and Roxane stayed at Alan's house, keeping a watchful eye alongside some of his battle slaves who had agreed to assist them. The next day, they began to investigate the Kurata region. Upon discovering a weapons store, Michio opted for a magic wand to enhance his magical abilities. Afterward, they proceeded to the outskirts of Kurata City and came across a suitable dwelling. In Kurata City, which was often used as a place to live for explorers, Michio wanted to be inconspicuous during their investigation. So, he decided to rent a house in Kurata. Even though he could teleport to any location, having a place to live would make it less likely for people to suspect him. They went back to the home improvement store where the owner offered them a rental property. They were interested in the offer, so they looked at the property and found it to be a big house with a large yard located close to the maze. Shortly after, Michio decided to test his teleportation powers in the house. The store owner had told them that the house was reinforced with protective cement. Luckily, Michio was able to teleport through the cement without any problems. After careful consideration, Michio agreed to a 1-year lease and completed all the necessary paperwork before purchasing any necessary household items. They then ventured to the Veil Labyrinth to test out Michio's new wand. With just 3 attacks, Michio was able to swiftly defeat a level 3 monster. Following their exploration of the labyrinth, they returned home to rest and purchase some furniture for their new residence. In the afternoon, they decided to take a break at the inn they had stayed in before moving to their new home, since it was not yet ready for them to live in. At that time, Michio and Roxane spent some time reminiscing about the first night they spent together in the room. Back then, Roxane was nervous and hesitant when Michio approached her, but now they have grown closer to each other and continue to enjoy each other's company. The next morning, they bid farewell to the innkeeper and Michio went to explore the Kurata labyrinth while Roxane stayed behind to clean up their new home. However, in order to enter the labyrinth, explorers have to pay the knights who are guarding it. After Michio finished with the paperwork, he finally entered the labyrinth and arrived at the first floor, where he found the atmosphere to be bustling with activity. After observing for a while, he decided to return home. Now that he has explored the labyrinth, Michio can teleport there with Roxane without having to pay again. Shortly after, a craftsman arrived with new mattresses for them, so they can now sleep comfortably and enjoy the sweet sounds of Roxane's screams. However, they forgot to get candles, so they had to engage in their planned activities in the dark. The following day, Michio and Roxane went to the Kurata labyrinth. The labyrinth was a place with a long history, and no one knows how tall it really is since the highest floor ever reached was the 91st floor. Despite the expensive entrance fee, many people still crowded the first floor of the labyrinth, and tried to stay there for as long as possible. Michio and Roxane entered the boss room on the first floor where they faced a weak kobold monster. The fight was so disappointing that Michio felt like giving up on their journey that day. The next afternoon, Michio and Roxane decided to do some gardening near their house. They worked together to build a fence and plant some seeds. After they finished, he remembered something important, so he quickly went to a clay craftsman to order a big bathtub. He wanted to have fun playing in the water with Roxane. On the following day, Michio and Roxane returned to the Kurata labyrinth to fight the big sheep monster. When he was about to attack the sheep, a magic circle appeared and their bodies became frozen. The big sheep's skill was to put others to sleep, and Michio and Roxane were unable to move for a few minutes, as if they were sleeping. Fortunately, Michio was able to heal himself and Roxane using the Duranel sword. They attacked the sheep monster until they finally defeated it. After returning home, Michio and Roxane immediately tried out the bathtub that he had ordered earlier. Inside the warm water, they washed each other's bodies and tried out his soap. Then, Michio brushed soap all over Roxane's body and asked her to rub against him with the excuse of saving soap. Moving on, Michio and Roxane resumed their search in the Kurata labyrinth and successfully obtained leather material from a slow rabbit that lived on the 7th floor. They then went back to Kurata City to exchange the material at a clothing store that required slow rabbit material to make high-quality coats. Unfortunately, the exchange attempt failed because the slow rabbit material they had did not meet the purchase requirements. Not giving up, Michio and Roxane continued their search on the 7th floor and found the boss monster, the Rapid Rabbit. After a fierce battle, they managed to defeat the monster by using their overwhelming skill that could overcome the rabbit's speed. After the exploration for the day was over, Michio and Roxane took a short break and enjoyed a meal of rapid rabbit meat cooked into a delicious rendang. After dinner, they rested for a while and then returned to the 7th floor to collect more materials that they needed for exchange. During their quest, Michio and Roxane encountered a group of experienced adventurers who were attempting to vanquish a dangerous rabbit monster. Sadly, their efforts proved futile and Michio was disheartened to realize that the adventurers' lives could not be saved. After gathering the necessary materials, they returned home, where they sought solace in each other's arms and shared a night of romantic intimacy. The following day, Michio and Roxane resumed their search and found themselves facing two formidable monsters at once, which are a spider and a goat. Nonetheless, they managed to overcome the challenge and became the only ones who were able to obtain the rare slow rabbit skin material required for their trading endeavor. They then struck a deal with clothing stores to make extra income before returning to their hot springs to celebrate their success with another intimate encounter. The next day, Michio and Roxane went back to exploring the Kurata labyrinth, and were fortunate enough to come across valuable skill crystals from the bodies of the monsters they had defeated. However, they encountered difficulty in adding the crystals to their equipment, since the process required an experienced magic user to ensure the skill transfer process would be fully effective. Shortly after, Michio and Roxane were having a conversation, and he was talking about his plan to make a will in Vale City. He was aware that death could be a possibility while exploring the labyrinth, so he wanted to ensure that Roxane would have her freedom if anything happened to him. However, Roxane was not on board with this idea and was willing to dedicate her entire life to Michio, even if he died while exploring the labyrinth. She even said that she would perform seppuku, a traditional Japanese act of killing oneself in honor of one's master. Upon hearing this, Michio understood Roxane's loyalty and decided not to write the will. Nonetheless, he still needed to go to Vale City to find a fighter slave with Alan's help, which would make it easier for adventurers in the Kurata labyrinth. So, despite his decision not to make the will, he didn't cancel his trip to Vale. Long story short, Michio and Roxane met with Alan to discuss their battle requirements, particularly their interest in having slaves from the dwarven race. Michio's reason for wanting dwarf slaves is to use their crystal skills to his advantage. But, Alan recommended a dwarf slave named Sari who has achieved level 10 exploration status, fulfilling one of Michio's criteria for fighting in the labyrinth. However, Sari doesn't possess the blacksmithing ability required for Clash. This made Michio think hard about whether or not to accept her into his party for the Kurata labyrinth exploration. But then, after considering various options and taking advice from Roxane, they decided to buy Sari and train her to become a blacksmith to meet the party's needs. The transaction process went smoothly, and Michio and his new party members returned to Kurata. As soon as they arrived home, Michio wasted no time in explaining his abilities to Sari and instructing her to use a hammer while exploring the maze. He believed that this would stimulate her blacksmith skills, as she was a dwarf and needed a trigger to unlock them. After a while, he provided Sari with various equipment to meet the party's requirements. Then, Michio also shared his knowledge of skills and job descriptions that had been hidden from others. During their conversation, he realized that he had an exceptional and rare ability as a newcomer to Isekai. The next day, Michio and Roxane returned to the Kurata labyrinth with Sari as their newest party member. Thanks to her, they managed to overcome all the obstacles and defeat the monsters with ease. After their successful exploration, they returned home to rest and discuss the special abilities of each race. It was during this conversation that Michio learned about the human race's unique ability, being a sex maniac. Suddenly, his newfound knowledge made him smile, and he immediately began a romantic relationship with his slaves to acquire the sex maniac ability. The following day, Michio was determined to create a steamy romantic story and have intimate relationships with various races in his isekai life. Then, he purchased multiple slaves from various merchants to accompany him on his adventures. Among the slaves that Michio purchased were Miria, a cat race female slave, Vesta, a female dragon slave, and Retina, a slave from an unknown race. This led to a series of adventures and romantic encounters with the different races in Isekai. The anime ends with Michio having a wild and hot romantic party with his beautiful slave companions in Isekai. The moral lesson of this anime is to consider the consequences of our actions and to treat all individuals with respect and dignity, regardless of their race, gender, or social status. We must also strive to create a society that is free from discrimination and exploitation.